Now, the long-awaited government gambling white paper has just been outlined by the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, in the House of Commons. The proposal on regulation will, quote, help redress the power balance between punters and operators while preventing addiction. And she also said that changes will better protect those unable to afford even small losses. But is that really what the regulation does? Or is this simply another limit on how British people can spend their own money? Well, let's speak now with Chris Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, for his view. Chris, thanks for joining us. First of all, there are different elements to this plan. Could you quickly run through precisely what's been announced?
Yeah, well, the announcements are quite vague in themselves, but basically there's three main pillars here. One is a mandatory levy on the gambling industry. They'll be required to provide 1% of their profits to the NHS. That actually just makes up for the money they used to give voluntarily via the charity Gamblerware that somebody at the NHS last year decided it was immoral to take that money. So the money is essentially being cleansed and laundered by being taken by force. There's no real change there, except there's guaranteed money of around about £100 million going to the NHS for treating problem gamblers. Second aspect is the affordability checks. So again, very light on detail, but the idea is that if you lose a certain amount of money over a certain period of time, somebody will contact you and you will be required to prove somehow that you can afford to spend that kind of money gambling. And the third element is lower stake limits. So the amount you can play per spin on online roulette, for example, that's going to be lowered, but we don't know to what extent, £2 to £15. And there's also some suggestion of having a lower limit for people under the age of 25.
And this is a crucial thing with regard to this limit and this age stratification. Is this the government saying, really, that people under the age of 25 aren't proper adults, can't really make their own same decisions in the way that others do?
Yes, and it seems to be part of a growing mindset. I don't know if you remember, just a couple of days ago, it was suggested that the government might be banning motorists under the age of 25 from carrying passengers. And you hear more and more from people in science really saying that the human brain hasn't fully evolved or grown until people are about 25 years old. In actual fact, there's no real point at which the human brain kind of peaks, and it obviously declines afterwards. But no one's saying there should be a lower limit for people who are very old either. So I think it's a worrying trend in kind of creating these apprentice adults who can't fully be trusted. I think once you are 18 and you can, do all the things you can do when you're 18, then you should be trusted to be able to have a gamble.
The government says, of course, it points to a lot of cases of really troubled people, some very, very sad cases, some instances where people in the United Kingdom have taken their own lives as a result of gambling debt. Is it not therefore justified to see some sort of intervention?
Well, yes, I mean, up to a point, but I mean, you're always going to have problem gamblers. You're always going to have some extremely sad cases of people who get into really serious problem gambling. This has happened throughout history. It happens in countries where gambling is completely illegal. Probably happens even more so in countries where gambling is completely illegal. The government, to be fair, has accepted that there is a kind of trade-off, that most people gamble perfectly responsibly. The problem gambling rate is only 0.3% in this country, which is low by international standards. But the fact that some people get into trouble gambling is not a reason to just have a one-way ratchet of regulation that goes on and on forever. The best response is to treat people who have problem gamblers. They're mostly young men. Frankly, most of them grow out of it. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy can help. Treatment does work, but attempts at prevention don't work so well.
I suppose one of the big risks of this sort of regulation, especially the sort of checks in terms of how regular those checks are, or those in terms of whether people are likely to be problem gamblers, those ones that are more likely to be problem gamblers might well seek non-regulated gambling, illegal gambling, and it might drive them to an even darker place.
Yeah, that is a real risk. I mean, there's not that many people use unregulated gambling websites in Britain, but that's because we have a relatively laissez-faire regime. If you want to gamble on something, you can do it with regulated websites. If, however, the government's going to put lots of barriers in your way and you don't want to give over personal information to an online gambling company, it is really very easy to find the unregulated sites. In fact, about 5% of gamblers say that they have used at least one unregulated website in the past year, and 44% of gamblers are aware of them. So there is still a Wild West out there if people want to gamble kind of off-grid. There isn't a great deal of demand for it at the moment, but in countries where there is excessive regulation, it's a very common thing. And not only are those websites totally unregulated, but they're also totally untaxed. So it's really not a good idea for us to be pushing people towards them.
A really delicate balance there, and very interesting on those other countries and sort of pushing people into more dangerous places. Chris Snowdon, thank you so much for talking us through this news breaking just in the last few minutes.